Welcome to the School of Life. Life is hard, but you have got to be harder. I'm Mrs. Collins, your life coach. Let's get started with Unit 1, Lesson 4, Applications of the Normal Distribution.
Part 2. So today we're going to look at finding the mean and the standard deviation from 2 points. Up until now, we've been always given the mean and the standard deviation. With that mean, we plopped it in the middle of our normal distribution curve, and we were able to then use the standard deviation to come up with the numbers on the left and the right of the mean. Sometimes that's not going to happen. Sometimes we'll have to use two data points that they've given us and a percentage. And what we'll do is we'll have to come up with the mean, and we'll have to come up with the standard deviation that fits those two data points that they've given us. And so for today's lesson, we're going to learn how to do that. So what they'll usually give us, once again, is a percentage. That's the first thing. And that percentage will either be our 68%, our 95%, or our 99.7%. Also, they'll give us two data points. Our steps for figuring this out will be to draw our normal curve. We're going to put the 2 points on the curve in the appropriate spot based on the percent they gave us. Number 2, we're going to look at the bottom row like it's a number line. So again, mentioning that the bottom of our normal distribution curve is nothing but a number line. With this, we're going to subtract those 2 points to get the total amount between the points. So we're looking for the difference. How far in between are those 2 points? Or how far away are those 2 points from each other? So we're subtracting. Number 3, we're going to divide by the number of spaces that we have. This answer is going to be our standard deviation. For number 4, we're going to add that number to the lowest number and then keep going until we reach that higher number. The mean is the number that's in the middle of our normal distribution curve. Now, all of that will make more sense as we show you an example or a few examples of how it all works. So let's look at example number 3. If 95% of the students at the school are between 1.1 meters and 1.7 meters tall, find the mean and standard deviation. So if we go back up to the top, we're told that the two pieces of information that we would be given is a percentage. We have our percentage, that's our 95%, and also the two data points. Our two data points are between 1.1 meters and 1.7 meters tall. So those are those two pieces of information that were mentioned that they'd give us. So what I want you guys to think back to is where this 95% came up. That 95%, if you think about it, we talked about how within one standard deviation of our data, this is 68%. Within two standard deviations of our data, this is 95%. And then within 3 standard deviations, we have 99.7% of our data listed. So our step 1 says draw a normal curve. Put the 2 points on the curve in the appropriate spot based on the percent they gave you. Well, they gave us 95%. So the 2 appropriate places on our curve that we're going to place our numbers are here in this location and in this location. Those are the 2 endpoints for our 95%. So here we'll have our 1.1 and here we'll have our 1.7. So what I'm going to do is erase everything else simply so that we don't have so many distractors on our page. Alright, so we've taken care of step 1. We have placed our 2 points in the appropriate spaces based on the percentage. Again, 95%, that's these two intervals, the endpoints and this endpoint. We have our 1.1, the smallest number, and then the biggest number, 1.7. Next it says, for number 2, look at the bottom row like it's a number line. So we're going to imagine that this is our number line. In order for us to figure out the numbers that goes in between, we have to take these two numbers and subtract them. So this is step 2. We're taking 1.7 and subtract 1.1, and we will get 0.6. So that 0.6 now means that between the 1.1 and 1.6, they are 0.6 away from each other. 0.6 away from each other. Well, that helps us somewhat. But what we need to do is figure out, well, how much is each of our little intervals away from each other? So to do that, we're going to go to step number 3. Divide by the number of spaces. And this number that we're about to get is going to be our standard deviation. So the distance between 1.1 and 1.7 was 0.6. Well, there are one space here. This is a second space, third space, 4 spaces in between. So 4 spaces in between our 1.1 and our 1.7. And I'll number those 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 intervals in between 1.1 and 1.7. So then step 3 would say, well, take that, so step 3, take your 0.6 and divide it by the 4 spaces that we had in between. So 0.6 divided by 4 is going to give us, equals 0.15. Oops, I'm writing things incorrectly here. 0.15. Key thing to note is that 0.15 is our standard deviation. Which is simply the distance between each of our intervals. So 0.15. So we move on to step number 4. Add this to that lowest number and keep going until we reach the higher number. So let's clean up our page a little bit. Let's get rid of that 0.6. We know where it came from. And let's go ahead with this. So we're going to add 0.15 to our 1.1. And when we've added 0.15 to 1.1, we get 1.25. Adding it again, plus 0.15, we'll get 1.4. And adding it one more time, 0.15, we will get 1.55. Okay, so as you can see, we've gone from 1.1. We filled in our numbers, 1.25, then 1.4, 1.55. If we added 0.15 one more time, we'd land at this 1.7. So we've added our standard deviation to the lower number all the way until we got to that higher number. And then the last part is step 5. The mean is the number in the middle of our curve. Well, what's the number in the middle, guys? The number that's in the middle is our 1.4. So our 1.4 is our mean. So the mean 1.4 is the mean. Okay, another way to write it is our x bar equals 1.4. That's our answer for the mean. And then our standard deviation, as we came up with earlier, standard deviation equals 0.15. So those are our two answers for this problem. We were looking to figure out the mean and the standard deviation. Let's try our next example. We're once again going to use those exact same notes. Okay, so they're going to give us a percentage. It'll either be 68%, 95%, or 99.7%. And they'll give us 2 data points, Steps: draw the normal curve, put the 2 points on the curve in the appropriate spot based on the percent they give you. Number 2, look at the bottom row like it's a number line. Subtract the points to get the total amount between them. Number 3, divide by the number of spaces. This answer is the standard deviation. Number 4, add this to the lowest number and keep going until you reach that higher number. And number 5, the mean is the number on the middle of the normal curve. So let's go ahead and try the next problem. So if 68% of women have a shoe size between 6.5 and 8.5, find the mean and standard deviation. So mean and standard deviation. Those are the two things that we should walk away from this problem with having, the mean and the standard deviation. So first off, highlight the fact that they gave you that percentage, 68%. Next, highlight those 2 points that they've given you, 6.5 and 8.5. So this is a shoe size between 6.5 and an 8.5. Okay, you must recall that 68% is 1 standard deviation. And 1 standard deviation is simply 1 step to the left of the mean and 1 step to the right of the mean. So that's here. This is 1 standard deviation of your data, which is 68%. So then that says that those 2 numbers that they've given you goes here and here. Our first number, the lowest one, is 6.5. And our higher one is 8.5. So that's the information that they've given us. We know that it's 68% of our data, so that's 1 standard deviation. And the lowest number is 6.5, highest number is 8.5. Next steps. All right, step 2, we're going to look at that bottom row like it's a number line. So step 2, we're going to subtract to get the total amount that's in between. So we do 8.5 minus 6.5. And 8.5 minus 6.5 gives us 2.0, or just 2. So this distance here is a 2. Next, step 3, divide by the number of spaces. So the number of spaces in between are 6.5 and 8.5. So that's 1 space here, 1 space, and 2 spaces. So there's 2 spaces in between. So step 3 says take that 2, which was the distance in between here, and then divide it by the 2 spaces that we have. So we have 1 space, 2 spaces in between the 6.5 and 8.5. So that's 2 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 gives us 1. Okay, so note that this answer that we just came up with is our standard deviation. So that's the distance between each little interval. It's 1. So let's highlight that part, that this 1 is one of our answers. That's our standard deviation. So our standard deviation equals 1. That's one of our answers. The standard deviation is 1. Okay, so then with that 1, we're going to move on to our next step. And our next step is to add that number to the lowest number that we had. So that's where we would go ahead and add 1. So 6.5 plus 1 gives us 7.5 here. If we were to go ahead and add another 1, 7.5 would land us at 8.5. So this, we've completed it correctly. So we're adding 1 to each interval to get from one interval to the next. Okay. So then number 5, it says that the mean is the number in the middle. Well, the number in the middle here is our 7.5. So that's our mean. So then your last answer would be that the mean equals 7.5, or x bar equals 7.5. Those both say the exact same things. So 7.5 is your mean, and your standard deviation is 1. And that's all for this lesson.